Previously, we saw how the main attack plan of the enemy of capturing the capital of Jammu and Kashmir, Srinagar, had failed because the Indian armed forces reached just in time to stop the invasion. After the decisive Battle of Shalateng, the enemy had to retreat from its strongholds from the outskirts of Srinagar, Baramulla, and Uri. The Indian armed forces were in the process of continuing to push the enemy out of the valley by recapturing Domil and Muzaffarabad. That is when they heard the news of the second wave of invasions in the south of the valley. The enemy had launched their second wave of attack in the southern side with the objective of capturing Jammu. If they were successful in this effort, then they would have been able to cut off the Kashmir Valley from the rest of India, making the Indian defense of the valley even more challenging in the long run. So it was extremely crucial for the Indian side to stop the enemy from capturing Jammu. This assault happened on multiple fronts along the Jammu-Poonch line. The plan was to capture all major towns along this line till the enemy reached Jammu. The towns in the region under assault were Mirpur, Kotli, Naushera and Changar in the middle, Rajouri and Poonch towards the north of the sector, and the future plans were to attack Akhnur and Jammu on the southern side. Troops of the 50 Parachute Brigade were aggregated in Jammu to begin operations to reinforce these towns in the Poonch sector. While the reinforcements were to arrive in these towns, the Jammu and Kashmir State Force garrisons were the only troops available to defend against the ongoing enemy assault. There was no outside help that could be provided to these garrisons. One major challenge for the Indian armed forces was the long border they shared with the enemy in this region. So the enemy could attack multiple targets parallelly. Even in the case of major victories for the Indian armed forces, the enemy could always attack the next town down the communication line and with just one success, outflank the Indian positions and isolate them in the north. So the objective for the 50 Para Brigade was to move north from Jammu and provide relief to all these towns under assault, but at the same time ensure that the line of communication between Poonch and Jammu is secure. With the twofold objective of 50 Para Brigade, they had to push forward as quickly and forcefully as possible, but at the same time leave behind enough troops and resources in each town in order to secure the crucial line of communication. The enemy's initial plan was to overrun the towns in the region in quick succession. They did not expect the town defense forces to put up much of a fight under such an overwhelming assault. But to their surprise, the defense forces in the towns dug themselves in and fought back against the assault. With the enemy's plan foiled, they were forced to change their game plan and resort to siege tactics for each town. By October 28, 1947, Mirpur, Kotli and Poonch were under heavy attack from the enemy, and the enemy started to lay siege around these towns in the coming days. There was some air support that was provided to the defending garrisons in these towns, but the air support was not enough to reinforce the garrisons. The crucial town of Rajouri fell to the enemy. The towns of Changar and Naushera, already under heavy attack, were also on the brink. 50 Para Brigade, in the meantime, sent their troops into the town of Akhnur as a prelude to their move into Changar, Kotli and Mirpur. Meanwhile, in the north, the 161 Brigade had liberated Uri on November 13th and was planning on continuing with their assault on the retreating enemy into Domil and Muzaffarabad, when the news came in about the Poonch garrison being under heavy attack and in need of urgent relief. With this information, the Indian side altered their plans for the 161 Brigade and ordered them to move south to relieve the garrisons at Poonch. With this, the two-front approach to relieve the towns in the Poonch-Jammu line was created, with the 161 Brigade from the north and the 50 Para Brigade from the south. The plan of action was for the 50 Para Brigade, currently present at Akhnur, to move at high speed towards the north of the Jammu-Poonch line on November 16th. It was to secure Naushera on the same day, establish a firm base at Changar on November 17th, and relieve Kotli and Mirpur by November 18th and November 20th, 1947. While the 50 Para Brigade helps relieve the garrisons in these towns, in the north, the 161 Infantry Brigade was to strike from Uri on November 18th and arrive in Poonch on the same day. The Royal Indian Air Force detachment from Amritsar was to provide aerial support to the southern side. The attack went in as planned on November 17th, but 50 Para Brigade was slowed down in the initial few days due to large presence of enemies in the region. Instead of their plan of relieving Changar on November 17th, they reached that town on November 22nd. They also faced strong resistance in the Mirpur-Kotli region. Due to this fierce resistance, 50 Para Brigade could not reach the Mirpur garrison in time, and Mirpur fell on November 20th, 1947. Kotli fell shortly thereafter on November 28th, 1947. 50 Para Brigade was able to relieve the garrisons at Changar and Naushera. In the north, on November 20th, 1947, 161 Brigade sent in a portion of their troops to relieve Poonch, while others stayed back to hold Uri. The troops going south were divided in two sections. The advance party under Brigadier Pritam Singh was able to cross the crucial Haji Pir Pass in the way and make link with the Poonch garrison. The second section, unfortunately, was ambushed by the enemy and suffered heavy casualties. They had to retreat back towards Uri. Subsequent reinforcements attempts from Uri could not break through the enemy over to Poonch. The enemy, with their heavy concentrations in the region, occupied all the important features around Poonch and laid the siege on the town. Poonch garrison, with troops from Jammu and Kashmir state forces, reinforced by troops under Brigadier Pritam Singh, formed the Poonch Brigade. The one-year-long siege of Poonch began by the end of November 1947. 50 Para Brigade in the south reinforced Changar and Naushera garrisons and set up defences in these towns. Changar was a crucial town the Indian side had captured because this was the town that connected Mirpur and Kotli, both towns currently under enemy control. For the enemy, not having control of this town meant they could not communicate or reinforce each other in case of attack on either of them. Strategically, it was crucial for the enemy to have control of Changar. For the Indian side, securing the line of communication from Jammu and up was crucial to sustain the war effort and the link up to Poonch. After securing Changar, the Indian side left some troops in its defense, and the remaining moved ahead with their plan of going up the towns leading up to Poonch. They concentrated their operations around Naushera. The enemy seized on this opportunity, and on December 24, 1947, they launched coordinated attacks on various defensive positions at Changar in high numbers. In a smart tactical move, the enemy anticipated a possible reinforcement attempt from Naushera to Changar from the Indian side, so they sent in some troops to block the Changar-Naushera highway to stop or even delay any such reinforcement attempts. The plan of the enemy was successful as they overwhelmed the Indian defensive positions and blocked their reinforcement attempts from Naushera. After a very tough battle at Changar, the Indian side had to retreat from the town. The loss of the crucial town of Changar on December 24, 1947 was a major setback for the Indian armed forces. The enemy, with its recent success, grew bold and made an attempt at capturing Nowshera, but with strong build-up from the Indian side over there, the attempt was foiled on December 26, 1947. The Indian side, after suffering the recent loss, reinforced their numbers in the region in the coming weeks to retake Jhangar. Brigadier Muhammad Usman of 50 Para Brigade was leading the effort to attack Jhangar and made the assessment that the feature of Kot, 8 kilometers northeast of Nowshera, was the crucial first step to capture to attain an upper hand in the battle for Jhangar. They planned Operation Kipper for the battle of capturing Kot as a precursor to retaking of Jhangar. Operation Kipper was launched and was extremely successful. After a fierce fight, Kot was taken. This victory acted as a huge morale booster for the 50 Para Brigade, who were still low after the loss of Jhangar. After losing Kot to the Indian side, the enemy attempted their second attack on Nowshera with increased numbers and ferocity and even better coordination than their previous attempt on the town. Even though Brigadier Usman had reports on an imminent attack coming in, the enemy was still able to achieve surprise by crawling up simultaneously at all vital points at Nowshera in the night of 5th and 6th February 1948. The attack came in from two sides from the south, one from the north of Nowshera, as well as at the feature of Kot. In the north, the full fury of the attack fell on the vital point of Taindhar held by one Rajput. This was the highest feature in the area, and hence gaining access to the feature was crucial for either side to dominate the battle. The fall of this feature would have made the defense of Nowshera untenable for the Indian side. The enemy put all its efforts into gaining this feature and attacked in multiple waves at the Indian defensive positions. One of the crucial fights took place at post number 2, guarded by far fewer troops, defending against multiple waves of attacks by the enemy. Brigadier Usman came to know about the attack on this feature and sent 3 Rajput to relieve them. The troops at the feature, however, had to stop their post from being run over till they were relieved by 3 Rajput. The troops at post number 2, facing the most fierce attack from the enemy, fought valiantly and successfully prevented their post from being taken over. By the time reinforcements arrived, out of 27 troops guarding the post, 24 were either badly wounded or had lost their lives. Lieutenant Kishan Singh Rathod, who led the company during this crucial time, was awarded the Mahavir Chakra, India's second highest military honor. Nayak Jadunath Singh of One Rajput fought valiantly during this attack at post number 2 and sacrificed his life protecting his post. He was posthumously awarded the Paramveer Chakra, India's highest military honor. 3 Rajput reached Taindhar just in time to stop the crucial feature from being overrun by the enemy. The multiple waves of attacks at Nowshera were foiled by 50 Para Brigade of the Indian Armed Forces. With their foiled attempt at Nowshera and the Indian side having secured Kot, the crucial feature to launch towards Jhangar, the enemy knew the Indian side would make an attempt to recapture Jhangar. So they strengthened their defenses in Jhangar to thwart such an attempt. The Indian side started planning the retake of Jhangar, codenamed Operation Vijay. In Part 4A of the 1947 India-Pakistan War, we saw how the Indian Defence Forces were able to secure Nowshera by pushing the enemy out of the town and all the important features surrounding it. The Indian Armed Forces had suffered a major loss earlier when they had to retreat from the town of Jhangarh under overwhelming enemy attack. With the enemy's foiled attempt at Nowshera, they knew that now the Indian side would try to recapture Jhangarh. So they strengthened their defenses in Jhangarh to foil such an attempt from the Indian side. The Indian side started planning the operations to retake Jhangarh, codename Operation Vijay. With the enemy's strengthened defenses in the region, the Indian side could not afford to leave Nowshera vulnerable while they attempted to capture Jhangarh. There was still a threat at Nowshera from the north that had to be offset. So the Indian Armed Forces took the next few weeks increasing their forces' strength in Nowshera by adding the 19th Infantry Brigade in the town to support the already present 50 Parachute Brigade. By March of 1948, Nowshera had both 19 Infantry Brigade and the 50 Parachute Brigade ready to launch Operation Vijay. The basic plan was to have the two brigades advance in parallel axes along the Nowshera-Jhangarh highway, with the 19th Brigade on the right of the road and the 50 Para Brigade on the left, and upon reaching the outskirts of Jhangarh, attack the enemy's positions from these axes. March 14, 1948. Operation Vijay was initiated, with both the brigades moving forward along their axis lines. Both brigades on the left and the right along the main highway faced fierce resistance. They captured one feature point after the other along the two lines and reached the outer periphery of Jhangarh on March 17, 1948. Now it was time for the attack to go into the town of Jhangarh. The two brigades positioned themselves along their axis lines. Forces from both the sides met in the middle, creating the center thrust and the remaining forces protecting the outer flanks. The following day, the attack went in. The enemy was prepared to go on the offensive and attacked the Indian center thrust with high intensity. Their plan was to break the spear of the thrust of the Indian formations and swiftly defeat the Indian attack. They put significant forces in the center thrust of the Indian attack, but chose to ignore the force formations along the Indian flanks. Seeing this opportunity, the Indian side quickly made a pincer move to attempt and surround the enemy. A pincer move is when an opposing force advances towards center of the troops, trying to break the enemy formations. The opposing side in response does a tactical retreat of its center forces and moves its flanks forward. With the enemy swiftly moving forward from the center, gets surrounded from three sides: the center, its left flank, and its right flank. Being surrounded from three sides, the enemy now has the option of either fighting the battle along three fronts and risking complete decimation of its force, or retreating from their positions while suffering considerable losses during the retreat. The 19 and 50 brigades made the pincer move by moving on the right and the left flank of the enemy, surrounding them from three sides. After being surrounded, the enemy retreated from its positions and suffered considerable losses. Owing to the considerable losses, they continued to retreat from the town back towards Mirpur and Kotli. With this, Jhangarh was retaken by the Indian Armed Forces. Operation Vijay was successful. After the previous loss of Jhangarh, the retaking of the town was a major psychological victory for the Indian side. With Jhangarh in Indian control, the enemy's easy access to the towns of Mirpur and Kotli was also cut off. So this victory put the Indian side in a strategically advantageous position in that region. The Indian forces strengthened their defenses of the town because it was almost certain that the enemy will make an attempt on the town in the coming months. The next objective for the Indian side was to go up the communication line towards Poonch. The next step for that was the crucial town north of Nowshera, Rajouri. Rajouri is only 48 kilometers north of Nowshera. But halfway to Rajouri, the road linking the two towns passes through a thick forest. This is Chingas. Chingas was an enemy stronghold, the base from where they had launched most of their operations into Nowshera. For any chance of capturing Rajouri, the Indian side had to first neutralize the threat coming from the enemy's stronghold at Chingas. The opening move in capturing Rajouri was made on April 8, 1948, by 4 Dogra from the 19th Brigade. Their flanks were secured by 2 Jat on the left of the thrust and 2 Rajputana rifles on the right. The advance was conducted on a broader front with the infantry moving on the hills on either side of the main road, while the armor moving along the road. The Indian side expected fierce fighting for the enemy base at Chingas, so they employed tanks to be rolled into the area to dominate the battle. The enemy anticipated the deployment of tanks and other heavy machinery from the Indian side and put in place their countermeasures by placing anti-tank mines on the tracks. It was crucial for the Indian side to remove all anti-tank mines from the tracks before the tanks could safely move forward. The task of clearing out the anti-tank mines was taken up by the engineers of 37 Assault Field Company. This was a highly risky assignment because the enemy knew that the Indian side would have to send their troops to try and clear out the mines, and they were prepared to stop such an attempt with heavy firepower. The engineers of 37 Assault Field Company went ahead with their assignment under heavy mortar and machine gun fire from the enemy. Second Lieutenant Rama Raghoba Rane was on this mission when he was hit by a mortar fire. Despite being badly wounded after the hit, he continued with his mission and cleared out multiple obstacles from the tracks. Because of the courage displayed by the engineers of 37 Assault Field Company, the Indian tanks were successfully able to move ahead on these tracks and attack the enemy base. For the courage displayed by Lieutenant Rane in this mission, he was awarded the Paramveer Chakra, India's highest military honor. With the presence of tanks and other heavy machinery, the Indian side dominated the battle at Chingas, and the enemy had to retreat from their positions further into the forest. The Nowshera-Rajouri highway was now clear of any attacks from the enemy. The enemy's ability to launch major attacks into Nowshera as well as defending Rajouri was offset by this victory of the Indian armed forces. With no major reinforcements available to the enemy at Rajouri, their defense of the town completely fell apart, and the Indian armed forces entered Rajouri on April 12, 1948. After the retaking of Rajouri by the Indian side, the enemy focused their operations on their strength in the Mirpur and Kotli area, with the intent of threatening and possibly breaking the crucial line of communication of the Indian forces from Jammu to Rajouri. The enemy's strategy was to weaken the Indian position at Rajouri in an attempt to lengthen the period of siege of Poonch. Poonch had already been under siege for approximately 6 months now, and the enemy believed that the town would fall soon. The main attack line from the enemy was again from Mirpur and Kotli at Changar. The Indian side had strong resolve to not losing Changar again under any circumstance. The force defending Changar was the 50 Parachute Brigade under the leadership of Brigadier Muhammad Usman. Brigadier Usman, commonly referred as the Lion of Nowshera, for his previous leadership defending the enemy's strongest attack at Nowshera in February of 1948, had become a crucial figure for the defense of the towns along the communication line. The enemy made multiple major attempts in retaking Changar in the months of April, May, June, and July of 1948. In all these attempts, the enemy's attacks were foiled and they were pushed back due to the strength and resilience by the Indian forces deployed at Jhangarh. Brigadier Usman, with his extraordinary leadership and acumen, had planned out strategic operations to capture all the vital points in and around Jhangarh, forming a strong layer of defense around the town. This put the Indian side in a position to dominate all the enemy's attacks on Jhangarh. The enemy got increasingly frustrated by their failed attempts and requested more support from the Pakistani artillery in one of the major attacks in July of 1948. In the morning of July 3rd, enemy's artillery guns started to pound at the Indian positions in their attempt to break India's defense of the town of Jhangarh. During this attack, Brigadier Muhammad Usman was attempting to move from one bunker to another when a 25-pound shell landed near him, taking his life. With this, the Lion of Naushera lost his life on July 3rd, 1948. Brigadier Muhammad Usman was the highest-ranking Indian officer who lost his life in this war. He was posthumously awarded the Mahavir Chakra, India's second highest military honor. The enemy made many more attempts at capturing Jhangarh, but was not successful in taking it. At this stage of the war, the Indian side had successfully secured the line of communication from Jammu to Rajouri and had also built enough strength and reinforcements at Rajouri. Now, the next step was to move forward with their objective of lifting the siege at Poonch. To complete the final step of the link-up with Poonch, the Indian armed forces started planning their operation along two fronts, codenamed Operation Easy. This was a highly complex operation because of its many moving parts. The enemy had a strong hold on the Haji Pir Pass in the north of Poonch to block any troops coming in from Uri. The enemy positions surrounding Poonch were extremely strong, and the southern front had constant threat on the communication line. With so many moving pieces, the operation had to be carried out with high precision and timing. This operation was codenamed Operation Easy. It was named Operation Easy to make the complex operation appear psychologically easier to execute. The link-up with Poonch could either be done from the north with the help of the 161 Brigade currently at Uri, or from the south with the 5th and the 19th Infantry Brigade currently at Rajouri. On the southern front, with the Indian Armed Forces at Rajouri, they had to take many smaller towns and features on the way before they could make an attempt to retake Poonch. These towns had strong enemy presence, making the task very challenging. Most of the line of communication in the sector was secured. The line on the north of Naushera was still vulnerable with new enemy infiltration at the forests in Chingas. On the northern front, the task would be to send troops from Uri through the Haji Pir Pass over to Poonch. Due to high presence of enemy in the region and the enemy's constant threat to Uri from the Srinagar highway, more troops were required to be available at Uri for the link-up operation to be conducted from the north. Due to operations to retake Dras and Kargil, Operation Bison, more troops could not be made available from Srinagar for the link-up of Poonch from the north. So, with the only option available to link up from the southern side, the plan for Operation Easy from the south was given the go-ahead. It was crucial for the Indian side to move swiftly so as to not give enough time for the enemy around Poonch to get reinforcements. With strong numbers of enemy formations in the link-up track from Rajouri to Poonch, moving swiftly was going to be a very challenging task. A plan was needed to offset the strong enemy presence in the region. This was done by capturing Pir Badisar. Pir Badisar is strategically located in the northeast of Kotli, south of Poonch, and behind the Chingas forests. Capturing Pir Badisar had many advantages for the Indian side. First, offsetting the threat on Rajouri from Chingas. The enemy in the recent days was able to increase infiltration into Chingas, and with a heavy presence was a constant threat on the base camp at Rajouri. Rajouri was the base from which the Indian side was to operate further in the north, so the Indian side could not afford to have their base vulnerable to attacks from the enemy. Pir Badesar was located right behind Chingas, and by getting behind the enemy's positions, the Indian side would force them to move out, fearing an attack from two sides. Second, since Pir Badesar was strategically located at the northeast of Kotli and to the south of Poonch, Indian forces' presence here would put the enemy in a position where, from Pir Badesar, the Indian side could either attack north towards Poonch or attack west at Kotli. This would put the enemy in a guessing game of where the next attack would come in. With the possible threat at Kotli, the enemy would have to divert resources away from Chingas and towns surrounding Poonch to defend Kotli. The reduction in enemy concentrations would make the thrust from the south towards Poonch a lot easier and hence more swift. As one can imagine, it was important for the enemy to actually believe that an attack on Kotli was imminent. To make this look believable, the Indian side was to conduct troop movements, minor operations and attacks along the Kotli front, and thereafter conduct fake airdrops in and around that region, making the enemy think a major attack at Kotli was coming in at any time. Phase 1 to capture Pir Badesar began on October 13, 1948. And after 2 days of intense fighting with the enemy, Pir Badesar was captured on October 15, 1948. Because of this victory, now the Indian side had outflanked the enemy at Chingas, protected their base at Rajouri, and posed a direct threat to Kotli. The Indian side then conducted minor operations and troop movements around the Kotli region, used its Air Force squadrons to do fake airdrops around the Kotli region. This made the enemy think that a major invasion was to come to the town of Kotli, and as anticipated, they moved their forces around Poonch to help reinforce Kotli. While the enemy was busy setting up their defenses in and around Kotli, preparing for the fake attack on that town, the real attack from Rajouri went in. The 19th Infantry Brigade, coming in from the south towards Poonch, coordinated their attacks with the Poonch Brigade to attack the enemy strongholds around the town. With the coordinated attacks on the enemy formations from the two sides, the Indian side won many fierce battles around Poonch, and on November 19, 1948, the two sides were able to link up for the first time in almost 10 years. By November 21, 1948, enemy concentrations were removed from the area surrounding Poonch. With this, the Poonch siege was successfully lifted after 1 year of efforts by the Indian armed forces. With the victory at Poonch, the Indian army started preparing for offensive operations into Mirpur and Kotli. These operations would have required significant buildup of forces in the region, and the winters had already set in. So the plan was postponed till spring of 1949. But the ceasefire was declared at the UN on January 2, 1949, so these operations could not be completed. In a major achievement for the Indian armed forces, they were able to successfully defend against an enemy siege for 1 whole year. The defense of Poonch during this period was a remarkable accomplishment for the Indian armed forces, who defended the town against all odds. The towns in the north of Kashmir, however, suffered a very different fate. The garrison in the town of Skardu, despite their heroic efforts and resilience defending the town for over 6 months, succumbed under intense enemy assault.